there are going to be some tax cuts in this bill. I mean, so what they're talking about is a $5.3 trillion reconciliation bill. There's about $1.5 trillion earmarked in there for tax cuts. So primarily what we're thinking is no taxes on tips, no taxes on overtime, and for, no taxes on Social Security. Those are like the three main priorities. But there has been this push by President Trump to try and lower, other taxes for individuals that make less than $200,000. That's what they're thinking. The idea here is that tariffs are going to pay for it. And, all the analysis that we've done, all the analysis that we've seen for other people do, it's not exactly sure that money is ever going to be there. So, what
tariffs to pay for the tax cuts.
Correct. And so what we're telling our clients is that we think, as of right now, with specifics likely to come out over the next couple of weeks, the more likely scenario is you are going to see Congress pretty much kick the can on a lot of these cuts. We don't think there's going to be material cuts to SNAP, Medicaid, the Inflation Reduction Act. But what you are going to see is most likely a very large deficit-inducing bill at the end of this, which could be multiple $1 trillion, because it's much easier from the policy perspective to kick the can of the issue down the road than it is to take a bill or a vote that's going to actually pull back benefits within the near term.
Can I just say we've kicked the can so far, the can's in Mars, right, at this point? I mean, we just keep doing this and doing this.
Well, and again, it's like that's the problem is that, for a lot of, in both sides of the aisle, it's both Democrats and Republicans.
Correct.
For them to actually take a vote that actually claws back some provisions or entitlements or so forth, it's extremely difficult. In fact, it was reporting over the weekend that from some of the tax provisions, let's talk about Medicaid and SNAP benefits, rather than implementing those cuts immediately, the thought now is that you would implement it after the election, whether it's the midterm election or even 4 years from now, implement it after the Trump administration. So they understand, they being the Republicans, understand that this is not a popular vote. We've seen Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri come out and say, don't touch Medicaid. We've seen the chairman of the House Ag Committee, Glenn Thompson, come out and say, look, we can't really touch SNAP benefits outside of maybe just trying to combat waste and fraud. So there's a lot of ideas out there, but at the end of the day, it's much easier to kick the can on the deficit than to do anything else.
So do you think that indeed we will see tax on tips taken away? So no tax in this next bill. No taxes on tips, no taxes on Social Security, and no taxes on overtime. Do you think that'll pass?
I think that's like the idea.
Okay.
So what we're waiting for is markups. So this week we have a couple of markups. From the Bloomberg client perspective, not the most, if you're in the defense industry, you'll care, but for the macro investor, not all that important. The big one you're looking for is the House Ways and Means Committee, probably going to be around in mid-May. And that is the one that's going to have a lot of these ideas in there.
And what's the total there that would add up to? What are some rough estimates on how much revenue the government would lose out on as a result of not taxing those things?
So here's the interesting thing. So the Senate resolution and the House resolution had two different, they were the same at the top number, $5.3 trillion bill. But where it differs is how are you going to cut in order to pay for this $1.5 trillion? What the Senate did is they said, well, we're going to just as a floor cut $4 billion, so with a B. The House said we're going to cut $1.5 trillion, so we'll have like for like. But it's much easier to say that you're just going to kick the can than it is to cut. So that $1.5 trillion will most likely include some form of no taxes on tips, no form on overtime. We'll have to see what the estimates actually come out to be. And for the New Yorkers and Connecticut and New Jersey folks, the SALT deduction most likely we think will go from around $10,000 to the general feeling in Washington right now is around $25,000 to $30,000.
What do you think, Carol?
Better.
Okay.
Better. Is this governing? Is this governing for the people, or is this just governing to make sure I keep my job by members of Congress?
This is governing to avoid the filibuster and to do something without the opposition party. And so this is how President Obama got Obamacare through. This is how President Biden got the Inflation Reduction Act through. And this is how President Trump got Trump 1.0 tax cuts through. But using reconciliation, you have a majority vote in the House, a majority vote in the Senate, and you bypass the filibuster. But the caveat is that you should only be able to do things that impact the budget. What the Senate did is they said, you know what, the current cost of these Trump-era tax cuts, of extending it, is effectively zero because it's current policy. That's something that hasn't really worked in the past. They just said, well, we're going to do it this time. And as a result, the deficit now may go up significantly as a result of this. But, we also tell our clients that there are a lot of deficit hawks out there that wouldn't be going for this. But we think President Trump ultimately would use his political capital to get those Republicans on board.
Meaning, sign this, go with me, or you're getting primaried?
Exactly. And you march down to Capitol Hill, look them in the eye and say, are you going to derail my plan?
Yeah. And look, and Jordan Fabian was talking about this earlier, Carol. He only has so much political capital at this point, especially with some of the poll numbers coming in that we've seen.
Is that good enough? Nathan, to keep the Republicans come the midterms?
Well, I would just say here, what's the ultimate goal for the Republicans in this package? And that is to ensure that individual taxes don't go up at the end of the year. Right now, they're trying for a permanent tax cut, but nothing says that if they can't come up with a deal that maybe they say, you know what, instead of 10 years or permanent, let's just do this 4 years. So that taxes would go up under the next administration. That brings the price tag lower and then would make it much easier to pass a bill.
Is it ever permanent?
Well, it is for the corporate tax, right? That's what they did in the first one.
That's permanent? No other administration can come in, or no other Congress can come in and change it?
Well, you can obviously change it but it's permanent, and from the standpoint that there's no sunset provision.
Okay, got it. I see. It's going to take legislative action to change it.
When you have the pencil sharpened, when you have Excel open, and you're going through these calculations, how do you think about potentially the burden being eased on lower income Americans with some of these provisions, but then potentially the inflationary aspects of tariffs, if those indeed remain in place, because the president says, hey, this is a revenue raiser for us. We saw a lot of reports over the weekend about companies starting to add a specific line item as a result of an import tax, an import duty. Does that then hit those Americans who this would likely benefit?
Yeah, I just saw our restaurant analyst, Michael Halen's downstairs, and, I was talking with a bunch of our consumer analysts a few minutes ago, and the question that we have from this package is, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick likes to say that it's stimulating, but if you're spending the bulk of this extending current policy, where's the stimulus?
Yeah.
So when it comes to retail in particular, there's a lot of our analysts are looking at this and they're just saying, look, spending is still somewhat strong from now, but what happens if we get supply chain shortages in a few weeks? There's a lot of different questions here, but ultimately the question is, can the consumer continue to spend as they're spending today? And a lot of our analysts aren't exactly sure that can happen.
What do you hear from the investor base and various corporate base? You are a policy expert, analyst, in terms of trying to figure out what the next, 100 days or next 6 months are for a Trump White House? So
the first question is obviously on the tariffs. The number one question we get is, when are these exceptions, or when is President Trump going to, quote unquote, back down on tariffs? And what we tell our clients is that, look, within the next 3 to 4 weeks, President Trump, Bloomberg News reported this over the weekend, that President Trump is going to announce deals within, quote, 3 to 4 weeks. But Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent isn't going to wait that long. He's feeling the pressure. And so you are going to see, I think, later this week or beginning of next week, quote unquote, understandings or memorandums. I think it's like 3 to 4 page bullet points rather than an actual deal. So obviously that could
China too?
Well, I don't know if on China, but they're negotiating with 70 countries. And the idea from the Treasury Department that we've learned is that this isn't so much of a U.S.-China negotiation, but rather, they've been saying India potentially could be the first one, South Korea, Japan. So you have this tariff argument this tariff debate that's taking place with, I don't want to say the ultimate answer, but at least some more clarity. But then the Republicans on the House are trying to get this tax extension bill. They want to get it done by Memorial Day. We don't think that can happen. I think it's going to happen during my vacation in late July, but more likely than not, because the debt ceiling is included, I think they will get it done before the mid-July.
I hope for your sake it doesn't happen on your vacation. Nathan, I want to go back to something that you said about stimulative effects or potential stimulative effects of this bill. There's this narrative that has emerged in recent weeks, given the challenges that that analysts are saying the economy faces as a result of this tariff policy, that there needs to be some sort of stimulus to the economy. And they're saying it's all about the tax bill. They're using this as a way to say, okay, we got to get this tax bill through because that is what's going to push the economy. You just spoke to the folks on the retail side. Is that indeed the case? Can it be stimulative in its current iteration?
Well, I mean, when you're essentially extending current policy, I think the stimulation from yesterday's taxes to tomorrow's tariffs and taxes, you're not going to see much change in the way of current taxes. Then you're going to see this no taxes on tip, no taxes on overtime, potentially this tax cut that President Trump's talking about. Is that enough that really gets the market going? We're not exactly sure that's the case. But I will say is that, Republicans, there's no other option here. If they don't pass this, there's really no other bills out there that people are talking about between now and the midterm elections that are going to try and address this. Even bills to try and claw back authority from President Trump on tariffs. Just the White House just this morning put out a veto threat on a resolution that's going to come in the Senate later this week. So this is it.